Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to the Artarmon local community briefing session on the draft LEP and draft DCP for Willoughby Council. My name's Norma Shanky-Williams. I'm the team leader for strategic planning. And on behalf of Willoughby City Council, I wish to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and cultures have made and still make to the nation that we share, Australia. So welcome everybody. And before I get on to the main part of the meeting, I will show a useful overview explaining the background to the draft LEP and DCP, which features Mayor Tanya and Dr. Deborah Deering from the GCC. So I'll cue this video.
Willoughby is a wonderful place to live. It is a city of diversity with beautiful landscapes, people, and of course our vibrant CBD.
Willoughby is a very diverse place. It has an important centre at Chatswood. It has some really much loved and very successful local centres.
Our residents really value our beautiful bushlands and of course our urban environment and our CBD.
It has a range of housing, quite a number of apartments and also a lot of lower density areas. It has important heritage precincts.
Willoughby City Council is committed to delivering a city that is green, livable, inclusive, connected, prosperous and vibrant. Over the last 5 years, we've engaged with the community to help us develop the Local Environment Plan.
The Local Environment Plan, commonly called the LEP, is the planning instrument which actually sets the framework for future development.
In 2012, we created the Local Environment Plan to help us plan and decide what is built and where in Willoughby.
That's been proposed for change, significant changes. For example, in Chatswood, it is an important commercial place for the whole of the district, and even within Sydney, it has a key role. We want to make sure that's facilitated and expanded into the future. But it's hoped and anticipated that Chatswood will grow to be an even more important commercial centre than it isn't at this point in time. You will see in the LEP some major changes to the heights for commercial buildings and also the introduction of more apartment buildings close to the services around the Chatswood CBD.
It also covers affordable housing, environmental issues and bushfire hazards. The Local Environment Plan outlines subdivision sizes, heights of buildings and the amount of floor space area on which you can build. The plan allocates land for specific purposes through zoning and sets standards for development. It aims to provide jobs and housing growth, more medium and high density living, as well as strengthening the character of our CBD. It will help us design our homes for the future. It helps us guide conservation of cultural heritage as well as protect environmentally sensitive land. It helps us create a better place to live with more trees and connected pathways and cycleways.
We also want to link one green space to the other green space so that it's not just isolated green spaces and recreation opportunities, but they can be a network where they can be readily reached by foot, not needing to take a car. They're opportunities that we need to try to grow into the future. While COVID has thrown up some uncertainty about the pace of change, we do know that cities do grow. Willoughby is a very desirable place in the Greater Sydney area. Sydney is a very desirable city. It will grow into the future.
The plan helps us to set our strategic vision for the future.
Being prepared is important and planning ahead is crucial.
So hopefully you found that a very useful background to tonight's webinar. It gives you some insight into how we're thinking and what the process has been thus far and what the LEP and DCP in fact do. So tonight I'll be presenting on some of the context around the current exhibition. I'll have my colleague Andrew Wheeler from the North Sydney Local Health District talking about healthy built environments in Willoughby. Jackie Mullard from the Strategic Planning team will talk around the detail for Artarmon tonight for the LEP and DCP, and Ian Arnott will talk about some of the more general changes proposed in the documentation around the local centre. So I'd like to also welcome the councillors who are in attendance tonight. We have 7 councillors attending on the webinar. We have the Mayor Tanya Taylor, Councillors Rusak, Campbell, Greco, Wright, Samuel and McCullough are all attending. So welcome to you all online. Tonight we have a presence in the chamber, although most of you are tuning in on the Zoom link to the webinar. So it's a bit of a hybrid approach to the way we're doing our consultation at the moment. Any questions that you have at any time can be submitted in the Q&A function of the Zoom, and we'll be pleased to see as many of those as you can think of. And staff will respond to those as we go, if they're straightforward and can be answered quickly, and if not, we'll provide those responses within the next 10 working days on Have Your Say. There'll be an opportunity for questions to be asked verbally at the end. Questions will be posed to us at the end of the webinar. We'll take questions from the Zoom and from the chamber at the same time. Any feedback or comments that are not questions, if they can be put into the chat area of the Zoom, and then everybody can see and share those. The cameras are switched off and microphones are muted to reduce the background noise, you'll appreciate. And as the webinar is being recorded and will be available on Have Your Say by the end of tomorrow, those in the chamber, you'll be asked to note that your image and voice might be recorded and publicly broadcast and archived. So you should understand that with your participation this evening. So in terms of the agenda, if we can move to the next slide, there we are. As I said, I'll be providing that strategic planning background first up, and some changes that are proposed by the state government as well in terms of zoning names. Then I'll pass over to my colleague, Andrew Wheeler, as I indicated, from the North Sydney Local Health District, who will talk about healthy built environments and how important that is in the work we're doing. Then we'll have some detail around the Artarmon Local Centre in terms of the draft LEP and DCP, and Jackie Mullard will provide that detail. And then I'll hand over for some general advice on the LEP and DCP to Ian Arnott, and there'll be time for questions before we close promptly at 7:30. So some of those headline changes that I referred to before, and if you've seen other webinars, you'll see these are common slides to all our webinars, because we like to provide a consistent message to everybody wherever you live in Willoughby. That one of the main headline changes is about the growth of Chatswood CBD to the north and south along the rail corridor, in line with the CBD strategy that's been adopted by council after being publicly exhibited. So those are major changes to Chatswood that we're foreshadowing. Also increase in the densities of our local centres, and those were the subject of our local centre strategy that was also adopted by council after being publicly exhibited, and consultation being organised around all of those propositions. So there's density increasing in Chatswood and in our local centres, as well as our industrial zones, where we're also providing opportunity for more height and density there, so we can encourage more investment and innovation in those zones. We consider them very important areas of Willoughby for an ongoing sustainable city. We're also introducing a new design excellence requirement, which we will apply to all buildings over 12 metres, whether it's a design review panel or a more full-blown competition. That's contained in our design excellence policy. We're also proposing to increase affordable housing from the current 4% contribution to 10%, in line with the North District Plan encouragement to try and do this, and to manage urban heat island impacts, because we believe that the changing climate and the impacts of the changing climate on urban heat are something that can't go unmarked in this LEP and DCP and needs to be attended to. So there are provisions in the draft instruments for that to be accommodated. We're trying to align our residential controls with the exempt and complying SEP, the code SEP as it's known, for the sake of equity in development, but also to try and achieve something that will be more aligned with the future of our neighbourhood anyway, as lots of people use the exempt and complying code SEP for the development they do on their sites. But at the same time, we're also elevating our landscaping controls from the DCP, where they're currently located, to the LEP to give them more statutory strength, because we believe they're such an important element of Willoughby's character, and so important for not only mitigating urban heat, but also to boost biodiversity and improve and create the character we all love in terms of Willoughby. Under the Development Control Plan, we're strengthening our heritage controls. They're largely staying the same, but being strengthened, because heritage, of course, is an important element of life in Willoughby too. And seeking to reduce the parking requirement, particularly for the railway precincts, of which Artarmon is one, as we know, where there's close access to public transport, and therefore we're encouraging more active and public transport use in those areas. And the documentation is on exhibition for 12 weeks. So we believe that that's a significant and appropriate time for people to consider their submission, and we hope you will take the time to lodge a submission with us. So the process for getting where we are now, which is on exhibition, that red box, has been based on the local strategic planning work we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. And that is now guiding the current LEP and DCP. So that strategic work has been around the CBD, our local housing strategy, our local centres and industrial lands, affordable housing. We have an integrated transport strategy, and the work that we collaborated with 2 other councils, Lane Cove and North Sydney, and the state government at St Leonard's Crow's Nest, off the back of the new metro station in Crow's Nest, to plan for the future of that strategic centre, has also informed this new LEP and DCP. And of course, the North District Plan, which sets the objectives and aims for all the councils in the North District of the metropolitan region. All councils were required also to produce a local strategic planning statement. That was something that was a new initiative enforced by the state government, and we adopted ours in 2020. And that effectively sets the blueprint for the next 20 years of strategic growth in Willoughby. And that has informed the draft LEP, which is called a planning proposal. And that went to the local planning panel, the Willoughby Local Planning Panel, for advice, who supported it. It was then reported to council, and then it was referred to the Department of Planning to seek a gateway determination, allowing it to go on exhibition. That gateway determination was granted by the Department of Planning and Environment, and they have given us some requirements to fulfill before it's been allowed to go on exhibition, which we have done. We've satisfied those gateway requirements. And now here we are on exhibition, not for the mandatory minimum 28 days, but for 3 months, which we believe is a reasonable time for such a complicated and complex set of documents. The current Willoughby LEP, which is from 2012, and the one we're still using, of course, until the new one comes into place, work began on that in 2006. It was exhibited in 2010 and then re-exhibited in 2012 and finally came into force in 2013. So it's now 9 years old and really in need of refreshment. And there have been not now 21, but in fact 23 amendments since Gazettal. So not only is it a document that needs review and refreshment, but it also needs to reflect the new strategic objectives and aims of the North District Plan and the state government in the region plan. So we have to refresh our local instruments in order to deliver the objectives of the state government through the North District Plan. The local strategic planning statement, as I said, was handed down in 2020 and endorsed by council. It sets that 20-year vision for priorities and actions for the entire local government area. And it was a very comprehensive document. If you had a chance to look at the LSPS, you'll see just how complex and comprehensive it was. It provides land use controls, or seeks land use controls, to achieve the outcomes in terms of housing, transport, waterways, biodiversity, climate change, resilience, all the things that you think need to be planned for properly in a local government area have had some headline news in the LSPS and need to now be implemented through the LEP and DCP. So the LSPS is where you go to see that whether or not we've included all the correct controls to actually bring that LSPS to bear, to actually deliver on it. So the basis of the new draft LEP is drawn from the conclusions and recommendations and all those existing strategies I've referred to before through that extensive community consultation we undertook since 2017. and includes, as I say, the local centre strategy, the CBD strategy, the industrial land strategy, the Crow's Nest 2036 plan, the housing strategy, and the integrated transport strategy. But in addition, it will insist in responding to Council's new Resilient Willoughby Strategy and Action Plan from 2021. This is a very important document that strives for resilient places and resilient buildings. We're now seeking to withstand climate change and sustain biodiversity and support vibrant, connected communities. So what we do in the LEP and DCP has to try and deliver on the resilience strategy that we've now got in place and make sure our buildings are safe, well-designed, affordable, and sustainable. So if we don't fulfill the promise of the resilience strategy, I think we'll have not done the job properly for our LEP and DCP. So we need you to provide submissions as to whether you think the job is being done well, or whether we've left anything out or something needs to be fine-tuned. In order to give us some feeling of what we're trying to achieve in terms of growth for Willoughby, the key statistics for future planning here in this LGA show us that the population is expected to grow to almost 92,000 in 2036. And although COVID has had some impact on growth, and we heard Dr. Deborah Deering mention that in the video at the beginning, that does not mean that Sydney will stop growing and Willoughby will stop growing. We will continue to grow, but the pandemic has, of course, had some impact on the rate of growth. But that is these are the statistics that we're working to until the state government replaces them with something new and different. The number of dwellings that are expected to grow by to 6,700 to 2036. So that's our own figure, that's our own calculation of the strategic need for homes until 2036. We were given a 5-year dwelling target by the state government of 1,250 in the North District Plan, but that target has now well and truly been met. So we needed, through our housing strategy, to extrapolate that and understand what our long-term strategy needed to be and what our goal needed to be in terms of new housing, new dwellings required. The number of jobs is also expected to grow to 74,500 in 2036, with a specific jobs target for Chatswood CBD, which is why we're so keen to see the CBD and the commercial core be retained for commercial and job generating purposes. It's a very important aspect of the planning work we've been doing. Chatswood needs to be a new and revitalised centre to provide for local jobs in the commercial office market. While we've been doing our local strategic planning work, the state government has been changing the system around us. A couple of changes that we thought worth mentioning in this webinar, that in 2021, the government renamed our environment zones to conservation zones. So they're now in place in the LEP. The former E-zones were those that you see on the slide, and we've got new conservation zones now in the LEP, such as the environmental conservation C2 zone and the E4 zone, environmental living zone, which was E4 and is now C4. Where land with special environmental qualities and have special controls applied to them. They're also reviewing the employment zones, all the industrial IN and business B zones at the moment, and that is current. So those zones will be changing and amalgamating with 5 new employment zones and 3 supporting zones under the Standard Instrument Order 2006. So the transition details of how that we move from what we've got now to what state government are looking to achieve are on exhibition with Council's draft LEP at the request of state government. And the outcomes of that exhibition will be reflected in our final LEP. So now I'll hand over to my colleague, Andrew Wheeler, who will talk about creating a healthy built environment in Willoughby. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Norma, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. As Norma mentioned, my name's Andrew Wheeler. I'm the Manager of Healthy Built Environments at Northern Sydney Local Health District. And if you haven't heard of Northern Sydney Local Health District before, we are part of New South Wales Health and work across the 9 local government areas in Sydney's north, one of which is Willoughby City Council. The Healthy Built Environments program that I manage exists to improve people's health and wellbeing in Northern Sydney by creating healthier environments, so ones that support people's health and wellbeing as part of their everyday lives. And the broad banner under which we operate, known as population health, focuses on the conditions that enable the whole population to remain healthy and out of hospital. So as we meet here tonight to discuss two important documents that will shape Willoughby's future population and the lives of those who live and work here for many years to come, I thank Council for inviting us to come here tonight and to talk about the important connection between the built environment and our health. Now, when I refer to the built environment, what I mean is that the human-made spaces and places in which we live, work and play on a daily basis. So our homes, our buildings, streets, sidewalks, transport corridors, and so on. And in this short presentation, I'm going to provide you with an overview of the connection between the built environment and our health, in order to set the context for tonight's presentation and discussion on the draft WilloughbyLEP and DCP. But before I do, I've got a question for everyone, and it's a very simple one, and that is, what makes you feel healthy? And secondly, how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? And if you'd like to respond to that, you can go down the bottom in the chat section and put in some of your thoughts. So how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? Well, what we know is that all built environments are not created equal, and the environments in which we live have a profound impact on both our physical and our mental health. Healthy built environments support positive health outcomes by making healthy and active lifestyle choices easier. And an excellent resource that summarises the many ways in which the built environment impacts with our health is the New South Wales Healthy Built Environment Checklist. This checklist is available to download online, and there you can see the 11 themes that make up the particular checklist there, ranging from healthy eating through to environmental sustainability and climate change. Now, what ties all these themes together is the concept of healthy neighbourhood design. And healthy neighbourhood design is facilitated by land use and development decisions, as informed by documents like local environmental plans and development control plans that prioritise complete, compact and connected communities. Now, communities that reflect these qualities support physical activity along safe, well-connected and tree-lined streets and paths. They also facilitate planned and incidental social interaction, as people have greater opportunities to meet at easily accessible destinations like shops and local centres and areas of green open space. They also support business activity and a strong local economy, and they connect people with key services such as public transport when they do need to go beyond the local area for leisure or work purposes. Now, in this diagram, you can see these many features of a healthy neighbourhood captured. So there's a neighbourhood designed around a connected and walkable street network, linking to key destinations that are also co-located. So for example, you might have a primary school next to a community centre or a library, an area of open space, as well as nearby retail. And what this does is it reduces the reliance on the motor vehicle for short trips. And in turn, this reduces local traffic congestion. It supports healthier and more sustainable forms of transport like walking and cycling. And it encourages people to spend time in their local area, building a stronger sense of community and place. So there you have an example of how zoning and development controls facilitate complete, compact and connected communities, and the ways in which these communities promote our physical and mental health by encouraging physical activity, as well as opportunities for social interaction, and providing access to healthy food in local shops and other areas, perhaps like farmers' markets. Now, a central focus of the draft WilloughbyLEP and DCP is housing, the third theme of the checklist there. And from a health perspective, the research evidence is clear that the healthiest neighbourhoods are typically characterised by a diversity of housing types. With more compact housing, such as apartments and townhouses located in and near centres, such as in the example shown here of the Chatswood CBD and in many other areas of Willoughby Council. Now, the word density can sometimes concern people, but what we know is that higher density housing that's well designed and appropriately located has an important role to play in accommodating future population growth and also providing people with more affordable housing options. And we know that housing also is a fundamental health need, and a diversity of housing types contributes to a diverse community, one in which all people can live and grow over time. And thankfully, through appropriate zoning and best practice development controls, much of our high density housing is setting a new benchmark for design quality. And through features such as, for example, as you can see here, green roofs and walls, as well as measures to activate streetscapes and also to minimise potential negative outcomes, such as overshadowing of public space. But with all this said, as our city becomes more compact, we have to invest in open space, and not just the quantity of open space, but the quality of open space. We know from research that access to quality open space within walking distance of where people live and work is associated with a range of positive health outcomes. For example, time spent in green space reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, of heart disease, of premature death, of preterm birth, of stress, and of high blood pressure. And of course, green and natural vegetation also contributes to a healthy planet. And this leads me to the final theme of the presentation this evening, which is environmental sustainability and climate change. And these interrelated themes are major public health issues, and we can design our neighbourhoods facilitated by documents like LEPs and DCPs in ways that protect our valuable natural habitats, that provide shading from buildings and trees to mitigate against urban heat, as you can see in the example here, and also which future-proof our communities against natural hazards and disasters like floods, bushfires, and heat waves. And heat is a particular pertinent issue. For example, in 2002, more people died from heat than car accidents in New South Wales, and heat-related deaths in New South Wales account for more deaths than all other natural disasters combined. So heat is something certainly that warrants addressing through documents such as LEPs and DCPs. So we've had a brief overview there of the many ways in which the built environment impacts our health, and guided there by some of the key themes there in the New South Wales Healthy Built Environment Checklist. So tonight I started with a question and would love to end with one as well as we think to the future, and that's how will the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your community's health and well-being over the next 15 to 20 years? We know that the future is not just a place we're going, it's a place we're creating, and we have an opportunity to shape that for better or for worse through documents such as development control plans and local environmental plans. So I hope this has provided some food for thought as you engage with Willoughby's future through these documents. And yes, I thank Council once again for inviting us to speak tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I always think that's such an important part of the presentation in the webinar because it really roots us in what we're trying to do through the LEP and DCP and to create healthy built environments and great places for people to live. So now I'm going to hand over to a colleague, Jackie Mullard, who's going to talk us through some of the detail in the draft LEP and DCP around Artarmon. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Norma. Good evening. My name is Jacqueline Mullard. I'm a strategic planner at Council. And in this part of the webinar presentation, I'll be taking you through the changes proposed in the draft LEP and draft LEP in relation to Artarmon. These changes reflect and give effect to the recommendations made in the local centres strategy in regards to zoning, height and floor space controls. And these are supplemented by specific controls in the DCP. The local centres strategy was finalised in June 2020, and you can see an image of the strategy on the screen there. The Artarmon Local Centre is located on Hampden Road, close to the Artarmon railway station on the North Shore line. A portion of it sits within the Artarmon Heritage Conservation Area. You can see this on the map on this slide. The majority of the conservation area lies to the east of the railway line and extends up to South Chatswood Conservation Area. Shops on the western side of Hampden Road currently provide a range of local needs and services such as post office, health services, takeaway food, cafes and restaurants. Wilkes Plaza is situated on the eastern side of the station and provides a pleasant, popular open space enclosed by cafes, restaurants and shops, as well as being a well-used pedestrian thoroughfare. The built form character of the local centre generally presents a two-storey street frontage, with many of the retail facades demonstrating the heritage character of the precinct with architectural features and detailing. Some of the key strengths of the Artarmon Local Centre include proximity to the public transport North Shore railway line, mature landscape along the rail corridor and in local streets, retail amenity and good level of pedestrian traffic, pedestrian connections to the train station and local shops, a wide selection of dining venues including outdoor areas and a strong village atmosphere. A future vision for Artarmon is identified in the local centre's strategy, which reads as follows. The village of Artarmon is attractive and well connected, providing convenience, shopping and services for residents, workers and commuters. The built form and character of Hampden Road and Wilkes Plaza fosters a sense of community with inviting landscaped private and public areas and open spaces. New development has retained the fine-grained scale of the existing heritage frontages whilst allowing for well-designed additional residential and commercial floor space above and improved pedestrian links and cycling facilities. The general recommendations made in the local centre's strategy include retaining the existing B1 neighbourhood centre and B2 local centre zoning for the centre, introducing a minimum non-residential FSR control in the B1 and B2 zones, introducing an active ground floor frontage control in the B1 and B2 zones, introducing a height incentive provision for lot amalgamation along Hampden Road to deliver a new supermarket, and retaining and refurbishing the existing fine-grained heritage frontage on Hampden Road while allowing for site amalgamation to avoid a continuous wall of development. This is the final recommendation made in the local centre's strategy and indicates the potential scale of development for the Artarmon Local Centre. You can see here the extent of the study area. I will discuss this in more detail shortly. Proposed changes to the height of building and floor space ratio controls in the draft LEP for specific sites along Hampden Road are indicated here. Floor space ratio refers to the ratio of the gross floor area of the building to its site area and is calculated by dividing the total floor area of a building by its site area. As indicated here, on the northern end between 130 and 134 Hampden Road, it is proposed to increase the height of building control from 14 metres to 20 metres, which is 6 stories, and to increase the FSR from 2 to 1 to 3 to 1. Similarly, on the southern end at 44 Hampden Road, it is proposed to increase the height of building control from 14 metres to 20 metres and to increase the FSR from 2 to 1 to 3 to 1. In the middle section, between 64 and 128 Hampden Road, it is proposed to increase the height of building control from 14 metres to 17 metres and to increase the FSR from 2 to 1 to 3 to 1, which translates to a 4 to 5 storey development across these sites. The Artarmon Bowling Club is included in the draft LEP as a proposed local heritage item on the basis of its historic, social and representative significance. The draft LEP proposes to rezone the entire site from RE2 private recreation to RE1 public recreation and add the site to the heritage map as an item of local significance. There is currently a development application in to modify the existing approval granted for partial demolition and adaptive reuse into a new community facility with associated landscaping works. A further DA has been, a development application has also been lodged for a chicken coop and run on the site. Part L of the Willoughby draft DCP includes specific guidelines and controls for future development in the Chatswood CBD, the St Leonard's precinct, and all local centres identified in the local centres strategy, including Artarmon. It is intended that the relevant performance criteria and controls under Part B and D of the Willoughby DCP relating to residential and commercial development will apply to place management plans. However, if there is any inconsistency with the controls under Part B and D of the draft Willoughby DCP, the controls under Part L will prevail. The performance, I will now outline the performance criteria in Part L as it relates to Artarmon. So the proposed development in Artarmon local centre should maintain the 2-storey commercial built form to provide a significant proportion of non-residential floor space for shop-top housing developments, retain and refurbish the existing fine-grained heritage frontages on Hampden Road while allowing for site amalgamation to provide further shop-top residential apartments, provide articulation to break up the length of the walls to reduce the bulk and visual impacts of shop-top housing above the 2nd level, encourage green roofs and shop-top gardens in appropriate locations, maintain the existing small-scale village character east of the railway line, maintain active street frontages, and provide deep soil zones in appropriate locations to support existing and additional mature trees with wide tree canopies to improve the streetscape and reduce urban heat impacts. I'll now talk through the final recommendation in more detail. Development controls for the Artarmon Local Centre in the draft DCP are as follows. 1, retain the fine-grained heritage frontage on Hampden Road. 2, use the slope of the terrain to achieve 4 to 5-storey shop-top housing developments between Francis Road and Jersey Road. 3, amalgamate sites fronting Hampden Road between Francis Road and Jersey Road to achieve a floor space ratio of up to 3 to 1. 4, amalgamate sites fronting the eastern side of Jersey Road and the western side of Francis Road to achieve a floor space ratio of 3 to 1 and up to 6 stories. 5, maintain heights of 3 stories and a floor space ratio of 1.3 to 1 on the library site. 6, minimum 8-metre upper level setbacks above the 2nd story to Hampden Road. 7, at-grade vehicle access to car parking and unloading area to be provided off Hampden Lane or side streets. 8, no upper level setback required to Hampden Lane. And 9, minimum 3-metre upper level setback above the 2nd story from side streets. Additionally, the rooftops of shop-top housing developments should provide communal, green roof gardens. This is the adopted master plan for the Artarmon Local Centre in the Local Centres Strategy and also the draft DCP. I'll now talk through this in more detail. Any future development must have regard to the following key features of the adopted master plan to achieve the desired outcomes. Improvements to the public domain and pedestrian access around the station entry on Hampden Road and Broughton Road, construction of an amenities block, small cafe pavilion and cycle storage, provision of new plaza and play spaces next to the pavilion, improvements to pedestrian crossings with new curb listers and thresholds to slow traffic, public domain improvements to Wilkes Avenue, retention of fine grained shop fronts, new developments to provide upper level setbacks to minimise the visual impact on Hampden Road, opportunities for lot amalgamation to provide a new supermarket close to the station, landscaping and good design elements along the Hampden Lane frontage, roof gardens and green roofs, at-grade parallel car parking, and any redevelopment of the library site should include a new community centre on the ground floor level. I will now talk briefly about the Artarmon Public Domain Master Plan, which isn't part of the LEP or DCP. However, it builds on a number of existing strategies and plans, including the Willoughby Local Centres strategy. This plan will guide future projects on the western side of the Artarmon Local Centre, including the Hampden Road Public Domain upgrade. Upgrades include the construction of traffic calming devices on both sides of the railway line in Elizabeth Street, Hampden Road, Francis Road, Broughton Road, and Jersey Road. The installation of a new signalised intersection at Broughton Road and Hampden Road, an upgrade to the park adjacent to the railway line around the entry to the station, including a new amenities block, a terraced seating area, new shared paths and paving, new street furniture, new plantings and street trees, and upgrades to the Wilkes Avenue Plaza, which have already recently been undertaken. The proposed Willoughby LEP includes a new design excellence clause to achieve the best design outcomes, which applies to the Artarmon Local Centre. A design excellence review panel will review and provide advice for proposed development within the Artarmon Local Centre. Other general LEP improvements include the removal of anomalies, a new urban heat clause, the removal of obsolete clauses, and an update of state and local land acquisitions. The objective of the new urban heat clause is to ensure new development incorporates effective design and ongoing operation to reduce and remove urban heating from the environment and protect community health and well-being. Council's LSPS includes an action to encourage the use of cool building materials in any new development to reduce the urban heat island effect, and where appropriate, integrate water features, both natural and man-made, into urban design. This is an example of an anomaly that requires correction. It's an LEP map boundaries to be amended. It should extend further south to reflect the property, which expands over 2 lots. And the description should also mention 233 and 233A. I'll now pass you on to Ian Arnott, who will discuss changes to housing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jackie, and thank you all for your attendance tonight. It's great to have so many participating in our consultation period. My focus in the presentation tonight is primarily around housing. If you've been to any of the webinars already in this exhibition period, you've probably seen, or you will have seen, these slides that I'm running through. So, but if not, and even if you have, feel free to stay in. So Willoughby adopted the local housing strategy, or the housing strategy, in 2020. we've been provided with, or the state government has indicated to us targets for providing new dwellings to satisfy the growing population of the City of Sydney, and specifically the target for the Willoughby local government area. We've estimated that for the population growth to be 6,000, in the order of 6,700 new dwellings through to 2036. And the housing strategy identifies 3 main focus areas for the provision of that additional housing. What we sought to do is really try to maintain the low scale, the character of our low density residential suburbs, and focus the additional housing around transport nodes and service areas. So areas that the greatest uptake or provision of housing opportunity we have provided for in the new local environmental plan is around the Chatswood CBD, being at the intersection of both the North Shore Rail Line, the metro, bus interchange, providing really good transport interconnection, and also the provision of services and facilities in that location, but also within our local centres such as Chatswood, to provide increased housing opportunities there, and in the existing residential flat zones throughout Chatswood. As I said, that's to provide housing choice and through both medium and higher density residential development, but also that low density scale, and maintaining that character of those areas. So the main changes that the LEP seeks to bring about in respect to housing are quite significant changes. The state government, as you may be aware, has a state policy on exempt and complying development, known as the Code CEP, and that allows for, in instances outside of conservation areas and outside of the C4 environmental living zone, a 2-storey dwelling to be built on a site where it satisfies certain numerical standards, without any reference to council, without any merit assessment of such proposals. If they tick all the boxes, then approval's granted through a complying development certificate, issued either by council or by a private certifier. We see that where that can occur on one site, and yet the site next door that may not satisfy just one of those standards, may intrude to a minor extent into a setback, for example, would require going through a DA process that, under the current controls, would impose far more stringent controls on the development. And we see a lack of equity in that, really, and also creating a difference through the street between what's achieved in the end. So we're looking to align the controls with those Code CEP controls. And I'll run through that in more detail in a minute. And that applies to both dwellings and to dual occupancy development, with the state government recently allowing dual occupancy through the complying development track. There's one exception to that, and that has to do with the landscaping controls. We see that the landscaping of our area is a really important contributor to the character that we see throughout the Willoughby local government area, and also a real necessary component of maintaining the sustainability and environmental benefits that come from landscaping, come from canopy cover, combating the urban heat effects. And for those reasons, we are maintaining and, in certain instances, strengthening our landscaping controls through the LEP. We're also, the state government has also introduced, under the low rise medium housing code, what is called manor house development. Where residential flat development is permissible, manor houses under the code can occur on a 600 square metre site. A manor house being up to 4 dwellings in a 2-storey form. What was traditionally seen as the 2 flats downstairs, 2 flats upstairs that were quite frequently constructed during the 30s and 40s era. It doesn't have to be in that exact form, but that's a traditional form of manor housing. We see that as not providing the best outcome for our residential flat zones. We see that by consolidating sites and getting more of that housing dwelling development addresses our targets and also provides for improved amenity rather than each individual block being developed on its own. And for that reason, we're increasing the minimum lot size to the same as that applicable to other residential flat development. We've also, in line with our community strategic plan, proposed an increase in affordable housing provision in new residential flat or shop top housing development from 4% currently to 10%. So just looking at different forms of single dwelling houses that have been approved. On the left-hand side, those being under the complying development framework, and on the right-hand side through DAs. And you can see, at least from a streetscape perspective, that the scale of development are not dissimilar. This is a bit of a complicated set of tables, but I'll just run you through a bit of it. So if you look at the table on the left-hand side, which is our current local environmental controls for floor space ratio controls for single dwelling houses, if you go down to the line that reads for 301 to 400, you can see that the achievable gross floor area for a 400 square metre site is 200 square metres of floor space. However, if you go to the next line down, if you have a 401 square metre site area, you only get 188.5 square metres. So in instances under this form of control, where your site area increases, you may drop in the amount of floor space achievable. Under the gross floor area control applied under the SEP complying development, it's a continuum all the way through. So as your site area increases, so does your floor space control. And we're seeking to align with those gross floor area controls in our LEP. It's a bit of a different story for landscaping. So under our current control, the landscaping controls are contained within our development control plan, and that's shown on the table in the left-hand side. The landscaping controls under the complying development SEP are shown in the table on the right-hand side. And you can see that in all instances, the council's existing controls are greater than those under the complying development. What we're also seeking to do is move those landscaping controls from the development control plan into the local environmental plan, with the intention of giving them greater legislative strength, greater ability to ensure adherence to the landscaping requirements, particularly when challenged through court processes, etc. It is quite a controversial move, potentially. It's not been, to my knowledge, done in this form in other councils. It has been done in some slightly different forms. And so we're interested in your feedback on that as well. So just running through an example of a dwelling house, this one being done under a complying development process, a site area of 650 square metres. Under the local environmental plan, maximum floor space of 279 square metres would have been achievable. under the Housing Code and as proposed under our draft local environmental plan, 335 square metres is achievable, and in this instance 312 proposed and approved. So you can see that difference between what our current LEP allows and what the proposed draft LEP incorporates is quite a big jump in floor space achievable. I just reiterate that this is not applying to conservation areas and not applying to the environmental living zone. It's only in those two zones where the code SEP is also applicable for this form of development. And you can see under our current development control plan and proposed draft local environmental plan, 266 square metres of landscaped area would be required. Under the code SEP, 195 would be required. And in this instance, 255 provided. So not that dissimilar to what we require under our controls. I'll just move on to dual occupancy and run through the types of dual occupancy that can be developed. The top left-hand corner being an attached side-by-side dual occupancy. The top right being attached one above the other. The bottom left being detached, both with street frontage, in this instance on a corner site. And the bottom right being detached battle axe formation. Under the code SEP, the bottom right-hand form, the battle axe form of dual occupancy, is not permitted through complying development. And again, we're seeking to align with that provision. You can see that in this example, and often with a battle axe form of dual occupancy, it's the rear yard that's taken out and taken up with the second dwelling, removing opportunity for large areas of landscaping intruding into the backyard zone, not only of that dwelling, but providing an intrusion for those dwellings surrounding it, intrusion in the form of visual intrusion, potential overshadowing, overlooking, and certainly the loss of the opportunities for canopy tree planting, etc., being one of our main objectives of addressing urban heat and to improve and provide greater canopy tree cover through our areas. So again, we're seeking to align in respect to the floor space achievable for dual occupancy with that of the code SEP, as outlined in the top two lines there. However, with our landscaping control, again, we're seeking to maintain a higher standard. We're seeking to apply the same control as would be applied to a single dwelling house. Dual occupancies are permissible in low density zones where single dwellings are permissible, and so we see the character that we're seeking for that single dwelling in terms of a garden character, landscape character, should also apply to that dual occupancy. This is also different to our current control, which talks about for dual occupancy 35% landscaped area. The other change is that up until now, we've required 5 years after construction of a dual occupancy before subdivision can occur. A dual occupancy undertaken under the code SEP can be subdivided immediately, and we're looking to also align with that. So running through an example, this one being an attached side-by-side dual occupancy, there being no change to our minimum site area for dual occupancies, that being 700 for attached and 900 for detached. In this instance, under the LEP, 292 square metres of floor space was achievable, and that's exactly what they proposed and was approved. Under the complying development step, a significant increase, 482 square metres is achievable. And that's what we're also proposing under our draft LEP. Under our current DCP, 255 square metres of landscaped area was required, that being 35% of the site area. 311 was actually provided in this instance. Under the code SEP, 265 would be required. So a little bit more than our current control is. However, under the draft LEP, being LEP, not DCP, under the draft LEP, 308 square metres would be required. So really trying to demonstrate through our controls the importance of our landscaping and our landscaped areas, and strengthening and increasing in this instance those controls. Just want to say also that both with the dwelling houses and these dual occupancy provisions, some testing of whether this is achievable has also been done. So it is the increased floor space with more landscaping. And so we did test out whether that is actually achievable on a site or a number of sites. And of course, it means a greater two-storey component to development, but it is achievable. It's something that can already be done in terms of those two-storey forms under the code SEP. So a site owner can do it today, and albeit with a little less landscaping area under our controls, they would be much more restricted. Nevertheless, which would generally direct them down the code SEP path, but we're looking to align with those code SEP controls with the exception of landscaping. So just as I mentioned earlier, the manor house provisions where we're looking to specify a minimum lot size of 1,100 square metres. If such lot size is not specified, the code SEP requirement of 600 would apply, resulting in a form of development that we don't think is appropriate or maximising the opportunities that our residential flat zones provide. In terms of affordable housing, our current control is 4% for new residential flat development, in addition to the permissible floor space ratio. Under our local strategic planning statement, we committed to increasing to 7% by 2021 and 10% by 2026. It takes, as the development of this LEP has taken some time to come about. So we've passed the 2021 date and we're going straight to the 10% by 2026. That 10% being within the permissible FSR on the site. We see that in deriving a floor space ratio control, we've analysed the appropriate bulk and scale of development, and then to add on top of that additional floor space for affordable housing is changing that bulk and scale. And for that reason, we see it appropriate to incorporate it within the permissible floor space rather than in addition to. We have had feasibility report undertaken by SGS Planning and Economics, which will be on exhibition with will be available for consideration in conjunction with the draft LEP and DCP. And that does, although it recommends 10% for some areas, it suggests that it may not be feasible for certain areas, including Artarmon, and we're interested in your feedback on that as well. Just in terms of the development control plan, there are 12, we've sought to make the document more user-friendly, albeit still quite a dense document. It is the supporting document for the LEP and contains the more detailed controls within it. So as you can see, there are 12 different parts to the draft development control plan. If in terms of making it more user-friendly, we're generally trying to put the type of development that you're seeking to do in the one area. That's not entirely the case. You do have to, in certain instances, go to other parts of the development control plan, but it is trying to make it as accessible as possible. So for a residential development, you would generally go to Part B, or if you're in environmental living zone, Part C of the DCP. The DCP identifies it as minor and major developments. So minor generally being that low density of dwelling houses or dual occupancy, major being residential flat development, shop top housing, etc. As I've mentioned, it's about aligning the controls with the complying development set, not for the heritage conservation areas or for the C4 environmental living zones, however. In those zones, the environmental living zone, some additional documentation required around where you're adjoining bushland or places of Aboriginal significance. And again, the landscape controls relocated into the local environmental plan. We've also sought to strengthen our heritage conservation area controls. So we've always discouraged the demolition of buildings that are contributing to the heritage significance of our conservation areas, and that's certainly our position moving forward. However, there are instances where people do want to demolish their such buildings, and although at present where that is the case, where we receive applications for such, we see quite extensive documentation around justifying what is being sought. And we're just incorporating into the development control plan the sorts of things that would be needed if someone was seeking to demolish something that we identified as being contributing to the heritage significance. We've also incorporated additional controls for semi-detached development, something that has been lacking from our development control plan to date. And just reinforcing the importance of protecting the external fabric and streetscape character. And for our residential flat and shop top housing development, we're generally aligning with the state government apartment design guide, where there aren't controls in the department design guide. Our existing controls continue to apply, and we've also got some deep soil controls proposed. If you're proposing development in the form of commercial or shop top housing development, you would go both to the Part B and Part D of the development control plan, as well as Part L. And Jackie talked earlier about the place-based controls in Part L and how they reflect the local centre strategy for Artarmon or for the local centre in which the development's proposed. Other sections of the DCP include transport and parking management, and we're looking at applying a travel demand management approach where it's in a accessible location, such as Artarmon is, immediately adjacent to the railway corridor and station, limiting the provision of car parking for residents in particular to try and discourage car ownership and maximise use of public transport or active transport methods. Our vegetation management controls were changed in 2020, and there's minimal further change to those. Similarly, the water management changed in 2019, and just minor changes to those controls to clarify some matters. And building sustainability, no further changes with that being adopted in 2020. So I'm going to open up now to questions, if there are any from the floor or any online that we want to see if we can answer. If we can't answer tonight, or if they're a bit more detailed, we will be responding and putting the answers up on our webpage.
So I think we've got Jane helping us tonight with some questions from the webinar. Jane, do you have a question you want to pose?
I do, Norma. The first question is from, I do hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly, Anjani. Anjani asks, will there be more parking available to support the local centre development?
Particularly in Artarmon.
Yes.
So with redevelopment of sites consistent with the strategy and the LEP DCP provisions, there will be parking required to be provided in those new developments. So a lot of the development in Artarmon doesn't have parking. A lot of that commercial development in the local centre doesn't have parking on site. New development is seeking to provide parking on site. And in some instances, that's proposed to be at grade off laneways to the rear, and it would also be in basement forms. And the amalgamation plan shown in the strategy and in the draft development control plan seeks to have the sites amalgamated so that the access for parking can come from the side streets rather than accessing from the higher laneway at the rear, which is quite difficult to achieve. Similarly, we don't want to interrupt the streetscape of Hampden Road and the heritage facades there. So the side streets is the appropriate location to bring in basement parking from.
Do we have another question, Jane?
We've had a couple of questions about feasibility, commercial feasibility. Anonymous attendee has asked, has there been any consultation with any of the major developers, for example, Mirvac, to understand the viability of the proposal at such low heights, plus with green and affordable housing requirements? Go on to say that the heights seem low, and would this encourage owners to sell to developers who cannot do much with the site?
Well, certainly this is something that we want to get your submissions on, because we have hit a suggested height and FSR for the development in Artarmon that we're seeking your feedback on. Before we did the work on the local centre strategy, we internally did commission some work from Hill PDA about feasibility of the development in the local centres across all of them in our strategy. And we arrived at a point of where the tipping point was basically for floor space ratio for development to occur. So our designs and our proposals were lined up with that. But that, of course, was some years ago now and pre-COVID pandemic. So there'll be a different story in the market for sure. But that is certainly something that we want to get feedback, and I'm sure we will get plenty of feedback on that, whether we think we've undercooked some of the heights and FSRs in some of our local centres, maybe in Artarmon. So we look forward to hearing what has been suggested.
Thanks, Norma. We did have another question similar to that previous one from RL, who asked about commercial feasibilities. I think you've answered that one too, and comments can come through to us if you feel that the heights and FSRs are not to what they should be.
Yeah, thanks, Jane.
Another question from Margaret Kay. Is there a way to allow dual occupancy in conservation zones?
One difficulty in doing that, and you may recall that under a previous local environmental plan, dual occupancy of a very specific form was permissible in heritage conservation areas where it was dividing an existing house with minimal change to that. The problem with allowing dual occupancy in those areas, I believe, would bring in and I'd have to check on this, but I think it would introduce the code SEP as a means of doing that, and the provisions that apply under the code SEP, and that's not that results in significant change to the character of the conservation areas. I think what's overtaken as a means of ensuring the character of the conservation areas is retained, but the ability to get a second dwelling is the secondary dwelling or granny flat provisions that limit the size of the second dwelling to a maximum of 60 square metres, but is permissible in the conservation areas, albeit not subdividable. And I think really that's what we've seen as the best way forward of ensuring that character of those areas is retained, while still providing the ability to have some additional housing capacity or dwelling offering.
Yes, we provide that separate dwelling, but in a dual occupancy form, because it's not being subdivided, of course, it would be dual occupancy.
Just not
Truly,
defined, not defined as dual occupancy, but as a secondary dwelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jane. Any more questions from this evening?
Yeah, one last question. This is from Ria, who's asked, have we considered the potential impact of increase in apartments to school capacity?
So we have done quite a bit of consultation with current schools infrastructure New South Wales. They changed their name occasionally. So so we have consulted with them. As you would be aware, there has been quite a bit of development of the schools in our area. Willoughby, Mowbray, and now Chatswood High and Chatswood Public. They are of the opinion that the densities that we're proposing are achievable. They are also with the view of their plans moving forward, and they are looking for further opportunities for school sites in and around the Willoughby local government area. But I think they're very aware of the increased densities throughout the city and the increased densities in this area proposed by the state government that we're to achieve, and are working towards providing the schooling capacities to address that.
So did you say that was the last question, Jane?
There's some other questions that are a bit more detailed, and for those ones we won't provide an answer tonight. We will provide a response, but that's the last ones from
analysis. Good, thank you. Well, it looks like we might get an early mark in that case from this evening's webinar. So I think it just remains for me to talk about the next steps in the exhibition. As I said, I think in the earlier part of the webinar, we're on exhibition until the 7th of June, which will have given us a period of 12 weeks overall for you to review the propositions in the LEP and DCP and provide us with your submissions and feedback, so we can then take that to council and see if we need to make any substantial changes to what's been on exhibition. This series of webinars, which we're about halfway through, has really been focusing on the local and issue specific detail and giving you the opportunity to ask the questions you've asked tonight. So we hope that that satisfied that need. And the feedback that you've given us today will go into an independent feedback report that we'll have prepared, that we'll take to council in around about October, we're thinking, with recommendations for what we do with the current version of the LEP and DCP, whether it needs to be revised in any way as a result of feedback, strengthened in some aspects, with things maybe being included that are not currently included. And depending on that scale of change to the current version, we may or may not need to go on exhibition again towards the end of the year. If we don't, if it's a straightforward process, then we could look towards the LEP and DCP being finalised this year, we hope. But more likely is the proposition that we'll have to go on exhibition again, in which case we'll probably see the plan being made next year, 2023. And that will be not altogether a hugely extended process, I think, but an appropriately long process for the sort of changes that we're putting forward for the local government area here. So it just remains to say that this webinar will be on the website tomorrow for your review, the slides and the recording, so you can revisit it again if there was anything you missed. We look forward to answering the questions that have been raised but not answered tonight in a couple of weeks' time, so you'll get responses. And to thank you very much for all of you who've tuned in tonight. I hope you found that this has been satisfactory and answered your questions and helped you form your views about what your submission might cover. And I thank you online and you in the chamber here tonight for coming in person. That's been very helpful for us to have real faces to look at while we've been delivering our webinar. So thank you, everybody. And unless there's anything else to say, I'll say good night. Thank you.
Thank you.